Okay, we make this work. So we're going to talk about the future, which in Thai is Anakot. So I'm going to talk about Anakot to you today. It's really a great pleasure to be here. I'm from Switzerland. I lived in America for 15 years, so if I speak too quickly, please wave, and I'll try to slow down, okay? Because that's one of my habits, my bad habits, is to speak to you too quickly. So throughout this conversation, I will be receiving questions via Twitter. I'll show you in a second how to do this if you are tweeting. I will speak for about 200 minutes. No, just kidding. I'll be speaking for roughly 50 minutes, and then we have question and answer sessions. If you have an urgent question or an opinion, please, you can also just feel free to talk right away if you feel obliged to do so. This presentation will be made available for download at my website. I'll show in a second how to get there because there's quite a few slides, probably too many, but you'll be able to download the PDF afterwards. So, you can tweet your questions today to my hashtag, AskGerd. My name is Gerd, you know, G-E-R-D, like gastrointestinal reflux disease. So it's very easy to remember. I'm number 2 right after that. AskGerd is the hashtag. So use the hashtag AskGerd, and ITUWorld use both hashtags if you can. And download the PDF later today at futuristgerd.com. So, first of all, a lot of people have questions about what a futurist does. As a futurist, I don't predict the future. Very few people can do that. There have been some that can, like Alvin Toffler and others. I'm not quite as good. I work in a 5-year time frame, and what I do is I work backwards from the future to today. So I help companies reinvent what they do down the road. What I don't do is this. I will not give you recipes or commandments. I will not have something for you to do and just tick the box, okay? The future is created by yourself in your country, in your situation. It's not created by me. This little animation shows really what I do is I take a lot of stuff that floats around on the topic of the future. I bring it down to a couple of key points. And here are some of the clients that I work with. So this is what I will try to do today. I will try to bring it down to a couple of bottom lines. Some of them may be rather harsh or, how should I say, challenging to you. And I hope you can take it in that spirit. So as you know, of course, things have dramatically changed over the last few years. Here's a slide that you may have seen before. The Pope in 2005, the inauguration, everybody was looking at the Pope. In 2013, everybody with a mobile device. This is how quickly the world has changed. How will this look like in 10 years? Well, probably just like 2005, because we have the internet in our brain. We won't need to use a mobile. Right? Maybe it will look like this. So we can just visualize and blink or think and watch the Pope. As Sergey says from Google, says, we as Google and as an industry, all of you, we're at 1% of what's possible. I think this is very true. Also very scary, obviously. If this is just 1%, what does the rest of the 99 look like? Clearly, one of our futures is going to be artificial intelligence. So technology is getting so good now that we can actually use technology to augment our bodies. And this will become a real topic, and I'll talk more about that in a second. But some of you may be movie fans, you know, talking about futuristic movies. One of my favorite movies is Total Recall by my friend Arnold. And if you've seen the movie, you know that in the movie there's a self-driving car called the Johnny Cab, right? He gets into the Johnny Cab, he takes off, and the cab is a robot. Okay? Well, the reality is today we have that, right? We have the Google self-driving car as a taxi. And this will come up in Las Vegas and in Singapore, many places like this, where you can call a taxi by pushing a button on the mobile phone, and it will pick you up, and you won't be driving yourself. In fact, you can easily say life is becoming faster than fiction. And this is especially true in developing countries. You know, I do a lot of work in Indonesia, and India, South Africa, Nigeria, where all of a sudden people are leaping. Right? So they're going from a position of never having had radio, for example, or regular television, to watching videos on YouTube. Taking a whole leap like you have in Indonesia, people who are now all of a sudden watching things on YouTube, never had television before. So there is a lot of leaps here. And of course, clearly, this has to do with cloud computing. A lot of you guys, of course, are in that business of cloud computing, But when we think about cloud computing, we can safely say that pretty much everything that is in our lives today will become connected, intelligent, real-time, personalized, and cross-platform, meaning many different kinds of devices. On our wristwatch, our eyeglasses, our mobile phones, our televisions. Now, when everything becomes connected, because we're thinking about cars, connected traffic lights, the city of Los Angeles just put 4,700 traffic lights together on a network so that they can synchronize the traffic and save 10% of fuel costs by being all connected with the traffic lights. So such a smart and connected world, as IBM says, the smarter planet, has great efficiency and great savings and great potential, but also can be extremely demanding when it's about how we are connected and why and who can use that data. Just imagine you're driving across a bridge every day, and the bridge knows it's you because of the scanner that you have, the radio frequency tag. This can be used against you to prove that you had a girlfriend on the other side of the bridge. Right? In fact, this is what already has happened. People in San Francisco, wives are suing the bridge people to get information about when the guy crossed the bridge, because now they're becoming really transparent. So in this world, we can clearly say we're entering, as Ray Kurzweil says, the age of exponentiality. Everything is exponentially faster. And this has great consequences. Of course, you all know about Moore's law, but Moore's law is vastly accelerating now. When we count like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is linear. When we count exponential, we end up at 64. If you count exponentially to 100, you end up at over 1 billion. So now we're living in a world, I would say we're something at 4, where the next number isn't 5, it's 8. And this is especially true in developing countries. So the speed of things is mind-boggling fast, and this exponential technological progress brings also a lot more risk. Now, this is something we have to get used to. If you're in the telecom business, you're not going to have less risk. You're going to have to invest more, move quicker, start new things, take more risks. For example, we can see the successful companies on the web today, Amazon, eBay, Google, they're taking risks all the time. In fact, they're taking huge risks, like Amazon took an $80 billion risk with the Kindle. Now the Kindle is the biggest seller of books worldwide, e-books. So taking more risks is really part of this fast future. A short note of warning, I work with a lot of people who are saying that essentially digital technology and the lifestyle changes that are coming are not going to touch them. Like this little quote says, newspaper publishers until 5 years ago said, it won't happen to us. Well, look what's happening today. Even in Brazil or in India, newspaper publishers are suffering because advertising is moving to digital. So if you're in the telecom space and you're saying, well, it won't happen to us because people need to use our network, think twice. It will happen to all of us. To banks, I live in Switzerland, where banks are impacted by the shock, to insurances, to governments, to everyone. And here's one thing that we really have to face today. I'll talk more about why that is, but I think the internet as we knew it is over. The internet that we used as a mechanism of democratization, of equal access, in a way that's kind of winding down, because the internet has now become, of course, as you know, the domain of very, very, very large companies, most of them being Americans. In fact, 92% of them are from America. Now, I haven't lived in America for a long time. I will talk more about that in a second. But basically what's happening now is that all of a sudden we're realizing, as this sticky note here shows, this is a sticky note that was taken from a meeting of the NSA, the National Security Agency. It was published a couple of weeks ago in The Guardian. This is a sticky note that shows how the NSA cracked Google and got inside of the servers. And this is a note that basically says, this is how we do it and how we did it. So all of a sudden, we can safely say we're entering an age of privacy and security failure. I mean, it's interesting to see, of course, that this is a global phenomenon. This is not just the Americans are doing this. I mean, everybody is, of course, including Switzerland. But what's now happening is that people are realizing what we are doing on the internet is extremely important to everybody. All that data becomes a giant resource. I'll talk more about that in a second, but data has become indeed the new oil. This is a very, very old formula. I hope you have heard this before. It was actually started in 2006. But if you live in an oil-rich country like Indonesia or Trinidad, you'll soon notice that the economy is moving away from the oil and towards the data. So data is becoming a primary driver of economy. Yes, we scan, says Obama. Now we can safely say that the power of technology exceeds the scope of our ethics. This is not just true for America, this is true for a lot of places. Technology has become so powerful that we can always say, you know what, we can actually do this. Right? The NSA can capture every single person's information around the world because the money is there and the technical power is there. And this is going to increase. Technically speaking, we can do the genomic scanning. We can do all the things that were impossible just a few years ago, and it's going to get worse or better depending how you look at it. 30 million people are estimated to be wearing Google Glass in 2 years. So every person can be filmed all the time. In fact, we become the perpetual audience. All of us becoming an audience to everyone who wears it. So with cloud computing, what is happening here is that all of a sudden people are thinking of cloud computing and they're realizing we have zero privacy, we have very little security, we have abusive marketing coming from this. So a lot of people are starting to think whether they should put their information into the cloud, which can't possibly be a good thing for our business. Right? I mean, cloud computing is as inevitable as music moving into the cloud, like Spotify or Netflix for movies. Our data is moving into the cloud. So there have been calculations already showing that essentially because of the security issues in the US and the legal environment of the Patriot Act and the FISA Acts is already costing US companies in the neighborhood of roughly $30 billion a year in losses. Because I mean, the people I talk to in Europe are all saying, you know what, we're not so sure we want to put our information into an American cloud. Maybe this is a great opportunity for some of you to put the cloud in other places. But here's what I'm saying as a bottom line. I think what's really happening is that technology is becoming so important in our lives that it's basically running a lot of our lives in a very deep way. But the other pieces of this equation are clearly going to be about trust and ethics and standards. How can we have technology that enables me, as if I'm a paraplegic, to walk by using my thoughts, right? This setup is going to cost roughly $1 million. But if I train for 2 years, I can walk again using my brain as a controller. It's possible, right? When these things become possible, how do I trust companies that have my data, that use technology? What are our ethical standards? If we can print a liver, do I drink more? I don't get punished for drinking, I just buy a new liver. And if I'm rich, can I be private? So if I can afford encrypted email, right, I can be private. But 99% of us will not be private because we can't afford it. So there are many issues about ethics, trust, and standards. Trust, of course, being the number one issue. I would propose to you that if you're in the ICT business, if you don't have trust, you won't get to live the next 5 years. It's all about that. I mean, clearly that's always been true, but it's even more true today. The scary part of our future is clearly going to be this: the handshake between humans and machines. And this is going to happen, if you're from Southeast Asia or other places, it seems far away, especially, for example, if you're in Africa, yeah, but it's not. The reality is that this thing is moving so quickly that artificial intelligence, for example, that's contained in Google Now, which predicts what you're going to do and what you need, is here today, even on dumber phones. So artificial intelligence is becoming the new normal. This is a clip here from Volvo. Volvo has an app that parks the car for you. I mean, this is actually quite mind-boggling, that you can use this app to tell the car to park itself. You actually get out of the car and push a button, and Volvo will guide the car using the app and remote sensoring to the parking place. And it's like a valet parking as an app. Right? You think it sounds crazy, but this is already here. And this is essentially using artificial intelligence. So this handshake between humans and people is going to be a decisive factor humans and machines, I mean, in the next 10 years. So we're going to see a lot of stuff, and I've looked around a little bit, and there's some very interesting quotes here. Right? This is a fellow futurist, Brian David Johnson, who is the futurist for Intel. He's talking about what's happening to nanotechnology. Essentially, by 2020, the computer chip will be 5 nanometers across. So what he's saying, as a result, we will be surrounded by computational power. For the average people, we are essentially living inside of a computer. Because technology will be so fast and so small and so cheap that our mobile phones are becoming our external brains. And we're living outside of a computer. Just check out these two devices here. This is a device called the Smart Things, which connects your house and all the appliances to your house. So you can network your entire house and control everything, the fridge, the air conditioner, the heater, remotely and on location. And of course, a Samsung wristwatch. So that is going to be a big factor in our future. Connected, intelligent, real-time, everything. On the left, you have the new street light. The connected street light that scans people as they walk by, has a face recognition app in it. It meters the environment. It serves as a Wi-Fi post. I mean, companies are making these things today. And they'll be cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. The Internet of Things is going to be bigger than any other Internet version of people. In fact, people are predicting between 70 and 100 billion connected devices. Cisco has done lots of work on this. I recommend you study the things that Cisco has published on this. They call it, of course, the Internet of Everything, which is probably more accurate than the Internet of Things. And clearly, what's happening here is that mobile devices are already our external brains. Think about this for a second. When you're at the hotel bar in the evening and you have an argument about the capital of XYZ, or what the Twitter stock is today, you use your mobile phone to find out. You go into a meeting in the taxi, the person that you want to meet, you look them up on LinkedIn while you're going. You use that as our external brain. As Marshall McLuhan says, the extension of man. These devices are the extension of man. And that's not going to change. But think about that for a second. If the mobile phone and the tablet and devices in general are our external brain, do we not have the responsibility to figure out what is happening with this brain? Because we're giving it a lot, and we're receiving a lot from it. So we can't take this very lightly, because in the end, for example, if I don't have my brain with me, my external brain, I can't function. This would be a scary thought, right? This is like when you take a taxi driver in a big city, and the guy does not know where he is because he's using a car navigation the whole time. He couldn't even drive around the block. He doesn't even know what city he's in using car navigation. The future of interfaces is a great piece here from Business Insider. I mean, we're going to see mind-boggling evolvement of search, for example, being able to hold your tablet over the food and find out what's in it. Already works today, right? Augmented reality, augmented translation, scanning inside buildings, being able to find out what's in the store. This is the future of search. The future of search is not search. It just does it by itself. It knows who you are, what you need, when you need it. And this is really what Google is working on, of course. The future of search is really as complete immersion in information and dependency on that. And the holy grail of search, of course, is prediction. And people are working on that now, basically being able to say, my device can predict what I need tomorrow. My device can predict what stock to buy and sell. My device can predict how fat I will become by eating this food. You know, the quantified self movement, you heard about these things, I'm sure. That is a huge amount of opportunities, but also of challenges. We're going to see interface revolutions, unprecedented access to information. Will you be able to go and study somewhere to study business or whatever you want, engineering, or will you just take a certificate on the Khan Academy in the future? What's going to happen to education? I mean, clearly in 10 years, our kids aren't going to sit here with textbooks that are printed. That's already quite clear. So how will it impact our lives? How will this human-machine evolutions happen? And I think really what we're seeing here is first we use the type, and now we can speak to the computer, which is already a standard pretty much. Then we can gesture to the television, like you've seen in Minority Report, going inside of data and pulling it out. That's already working today. Wearing Google Glass, we can blink and get information. And in the future, the last point is we can just think, and then it connects us. That will be the scary part. I'm not sure I want the computer to do my thinking or my, decide if I should get married to this woman or not, based on my DNA analysis. I'm already married, so it's too late. But and then we go on, saying basically what's already happening is that we're looking at manufacturing and physical goods. 3D printing. Do you need to buy an iPhone cover? Well, you can have it printed using a printed machine. You can have your shoe printed, and very soon you can print your own food. The other day, 3 months ago, I tasted artificial meat, fake meat, which is a lot of companies are working on. You can print this. Right? You can have a printer, print the meat. I kind of liked the taste, but I didn't like the experience, I have to be honest. But what we're seeing here is the Napsterization of manufacturing. Imagine that if you make shoes, and they don't use, if they don't use like 200 compounds, but just 3 or 4, you can have the machine print that. This is exactly what happened to music, 10 years ago. You can make a copy of a shoe with a push of a button. And that should be very interesting to see what comes out of this. I mean, clearly, technology, and especially mobile technology, is all about empowerment. I mean, we as consumers, so-called consumers today, we are more empowered than ever before. Think about all the social revolutions. Think about what's happening in Africa, North Africa, and the Middle Eastern countries, about how people are using social media for these kind of tools. At the same time that I complain, for example, about something using social media, of course, the police forces can also use that to find me. It works in both directions. It's empowerment, but at the same time, it's also a liability. And we can safely say that connectivity is like oxygen. We need it to live. And that's also the scary part. In many ways, you could argue already quite clearly that being offline is the new luxury. So in fact, there's hotels charging now to guarantee that you can't connect. Right? On the mobile phone, they have a blocking mechanism, but they charge for that. It's like, and there's places you can go to where they say, guaranteed, nobody can reach you. So be without oxygen in a way. But if connectivity is like oxygen, then here's a slide I found the other day on the Smart Planet from IBM. This is a very scary development. They're saying what's happening with mobile devices, we're going from synchronizing, to see me, sharing photos, to knowing me as the device, and then the device is, in the end, being me. I mean, this is a very logical consequence. When this device knows all about me, it can then decide to be me, because it can basically say, I represent Gerd, and I'm buying a car, make a bid. Right? Already works. So that will be a future that we'll have to really think about this. Maybe there's a piece of enslavement in the empowerment. And this is certainly something that we have to keep an eye on. We don't want people to be enslaved just because it's good business. They buy more stuff. And then we end up with the same repetition. Like this cartoon says, I'm wearing this funnel on my head. It keeps me looking at my phone every 2 seconds. I mean, you kind of feel that way sometimes when you're having dinner with people. Everybody's under the table doing their BlackBerry. So here's some latest research. If you haven't seen this yet, Henry Blodgett, who is from Business Insider, published a report on the future of the Internet about 4 days ago. It's like 150 slides. Just look for Henry Blodgett. You'll find all this stuff. It's really powerful. He's saying 75 billion connected devices by 2020, even beating the Cisco prediction of 50 billion. Maybe it'll be 100 billion. I'll top that, right? But this clearly has huge economic potential. All of you in this business are saying, well, this is great. We're all going to make so much money. But think about the unintended consequences, because we have to think about those too. What are you going to do about the unintended consequences? When people in Indonesia that never had television or radio, they can use the LTE network to watch YouTube. It has unintended consequences. It changes the way that they think about life. It changes how they vote, what their beliefs are, and on, right? Unintended consequences are going to be a big side effect of this. So yes, I can use technology to make my life better, but maybe in the progress of that, I become more transparent, digitally naked, you could say. Another slide from his thing is a little bit hard to read here, but he's saying that all the next big things in mobile, for example, wearable computing, connected cars, the mobile wallet, mobile health, these are all very, very big business areas, as I'm sure you're aware of, and very powerful areas, but will have vast societal and behavioral changes driven by these technological advancements. And it is our job, I think, in this business to think about all the cool technology and how we can make money with that, but also to think about the changes that we're driving with this and how to deal with this. So I'm going to use this Peter Drucker quote, which is quite famous now. But he says, the greatest danger in times of turbulence and change is not the turbulence itself, but to act with yesterday's logic. And there's two industries where I think this is happening most. Guess which one of those I'm talking about here. The first one, the music business and the media business. Clearly. Yesterday's logic, that's all they do, basically. I mean, I worked in the music business for 15 years. They just started having today's logic last year. They'll never get to tomorrow's logic. Check out this slide here on the left. This is the amount of over-the-top messaging that people are using compared to SMS. Now, you're in this business, you know that SMS makes $320 million a day in revenues. What's going to happen to SMS when everybody has a data package? It's toast. I mean, WhatsApp, Viber, Twitter, instant messaging, iMessage. Once you are connected, why do you need SMS? Because the other person isn't connected. When that's fixed, it's gone. So yesterday's logic says the customer is captive. Can't do anything without us. The future is clearly the customer has lots of choices. And we have to find a way to add more value. Look at television. Around the world, the same thing is happening with television. People are saying, you know what, do I really need to have cable or satellite? Well, if you have it, you keep it. Right? But try to find the 20-year-old person who's going to sign up for cable television. They have the internet. Right? They watch their stuff over the internet. Legal or not, makes no difference. Right? That's what they do. And see what's happening with European telecom revenues? This is from Simon Torrance from Telco 2.0. ARPU declining like crazy because we're using yesterday's logic. Ask yourself a simple question. And are you going full speed off the cliff using yesterday's logic? And I think if you project 5 years into the future, what telecom companies are going to do, clearly it cannot be providing faster connectivity at ever lower prices. I mean, that logic, as you know, it's flawed. Right? So I think what's going to happen here is that if you picture yourself here on the left being a big fish in a small bowl, that's telecom until now. Clearly, a lot of state-owned companies were the only fish in the bowl. Right? Now we're moving into a different world to where we're a part of a bigger bowl, and there's other fish. Is that a bad thing? I think it's a good thing. Because the bowl is so much bigger. There's so many more businesses there. And clearly, this is the other part of the equation. The user is becoming incredibly powerful. They decide what they want to do. How are you going to tell users that they can't use WhatsApp? I mean, how are you going to do that? How are you going to ask people, how are you going to ask Google to pay for streaming? I mean, you can ask them, but don't wait for the answer. I mean, the bottom line is we're heading to a future which I'll call telemedia. It's the convergence of telecom, media, communications, education, devices, hardware, converging. I mean, this is not new, but it's finally starting to become really obvious to people. So as an example, what's happening here is the future of media. This is about Netflix. You guys know Netflix is not very, it's not at all, I think, in Asia, Southeast Asia. But I think they're in 17 countries. They have 43 million subscribers. It's $10 a month for unlimited access to movies. HD streaming. $10 a month or 10 euros in Europe, right? And you may know Kevin Spacey, who is the star of the very first Netflix show that they produced called House of Cards. And let's listen to a second of what he's saying about media.
Clearly, the success of the Netflix model releasing the entire season of House of Cards at once proved one thing. The audience wants the control. They want the freedom. If they want to binge, as they've been doing on House of Cards and lots of other shows, then we should let them binge. I mean, I can't tell you how many people have stopped me on the street and said, thanks, you sucked 3 days out of my life. And through this new form of distribution, we have demonstrated that we have learned the lesson that the music industry didn't learn. Give people what they want, when they want it, in the form they want it in, at a reasonable price.
I'll stop there. He's so right. I mean, people are saying that consumers don't want to pay for content. Well, 43 million people paying $10, right? I mean, that's huge. What are we doing wrong if we don't get them to pay? We're not giving them the control. This is the problem. We have to give users the control, and then they will pay. As simple as that. So we don't run to government and say, you should make laws to pass, copy protection or all this stuff. I mean, this is a flawed approach. Right? Forcing people to pay is like forcing people to love. You can give it a try, but it won't work. It has never worked and will not work. Another very important thing is happening is that our competitive advantage is changing. So if you're part of a big company running a network, right, your competitive advantage has always been that you are the one doing it. So how are people going to get around you? You need to have that infrastructure. Well, the future is going to be quite different. And this is a great comment by Rita McGrath. She wrote a new book that's called The End of Competitive Advantage. Okay? You should read this book because it's talking essentially about your business.
The end of competitive advantage is driven by my observation that even though everybody recognizes times are changing, it's volatile, and we need to do things differently, nobody seems to yet have cracked the code on how to do that. But how would you strategize differently? How would you do things differently if you genuinely believed you lived in a world of temporary competitive advantage? So among the concepts that I'm talking about in the book are, we're really going from a situation where industry is our fundamental unit of analysis in strategy to a situation where arenas are the fundamental unit of analysis. We now see the most important competition for many industries not being other firms within the industry, it's other industries.
Yeah, think about that for a second. The telecom business is now part of an arena, and that arena is called connectivity, communications, content, all the stuff that's around it. That's the arena. The arena you're playing in, just like Netflix is playing in the arena of entertainment, right? Not movies. Much larger arena. Just like Volkswagen and Porsche and all the car companies are in the arena of mobility, not production of cars. Just like airlines are in the business of transportation, not flying. Right? It could be virtual flying, right? Which you'll see airlines get into. But this is very important to understand. As she says, companies in high-velocity industries like yours must learn to cycle rapidly through the stages of competitive advantage. They need to have another approach, and she calls this the transient advantage, which means you have an advantage, you play it out, you move on to the next one. And all the successful firms in technology, that's what they do. I mean, Google is a master of this, right? They play it out. If it doesn't work, they junk it, move on to the next one. And they always have new ones. IBM is another great example, going from the mainframe to this idea of a smarter planet. I mean, could be anything, the smarter planet, right? It's ingenious because it really fits everywhere. I mean, this is the way that we're going to plan business in the future. So our future is, going back to the exponential, right? We're going from linear to exponential and from linear to lateral. So all of a sudden, you're in the business that has to deal with exponential change. I mean, look at this curve here, right? It's completely different. You can't think linear and be successful in an exponential world. Well, you have a disconnect there, right? and lateral as well. So as an example, Google is putting on balloons. I think the project is called Project Loon. Putting balloons up in the air to create internet connectivity in countries where you can't otherwise have it. And this is not Project Loony, in the sense of crazy. Why are they doing this? Well, Google also rolls out email from SMS in Africa. So you can get emails, even though you don't have a smartphone, you can get emails via SMS. Now, the simple question I have about this, why does it take a Google to do this? Where have you been? Why does it take a Google to come up with a self-driving car? Google isn't in the car business. Google is not in the connectivity business per se. They're looking, of course, to jumpstart things. Why does it take a Google to do this? As Rita was saying, the most serious competition will come from outsiders. So if you run a large telco or ISP or otherwise ICT organization, look for the outsiders that want to kill you and bring them in. Airbnb is the place where you find hotel rooms now at private people's houses. There's like 15 hotel chains suing Airbnb for unfair competition. Bring those people in. Bring those in that are trying to kill you. Twitter went public 2 weeks ago. Anybody buy stock? You should have. It's worth $31 billion now. And Twitter could very easily now buy CNN if it was for sale. Maybe it will be soon. Called TNN, right? Twitter News Network. Okay, we have a question here via Twitter. I will answer real quick because it fits there. From Giacomo Domenico. He's asking about power and batteries. I think this is a very good fit. The key question for devices, of course, is always going to be how you power devices if you don't have a lot of electric connections and juice wherever you live, especially in Africa and developing countries. I think the answer for that is, first, we'll have fuel cells ready within the next 5 to 8 years, fuel cell technology. And second, solar. To me, solar is that ultimate answer for a lot of these questions about how people will get electricity. And again, there, the competition will come from outsiders as well. And I think this is a crucial point. So back to this for a second. The question is, outside of the US, which is an interesting question, considering that 91% of all internet goodies are coming from the US, including all the big internet companies, and of course from China as the second wave. Do we have innovation failure in ROW, the rest of the world? I mean, what's going on here? Why is all this stuff coming from there or now from China? What is happening with the rest of the world? What's happening here? And can the future of the internet continue to be defined, controlled, and engineered by the US? And I'm saying this in full awareness of the fact that we have discussions between ECAN and ITU and many others, and clearly, huge topic. My kids are American, my ex-wife is American, but there's got a lot of great things about this. But here's the question. Ultimately, the future of the internet cannot be defined by a country that runs the entire infrastructure of it. Right? I'll give you some reasons for this. First, currently we have systematic abuse and surveillance default in the US technology. That's not because they want to, right? Because of the legal situation. Google is suing the US government, along with the EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Every tech company is suing the government because they're in deep trouble. What are they going to do about this? I don't think much will happen on this. We have information superiority as a declared objective of the US government. We're talking about information superiority, meaning knowing everything that goes on in every possible permutation at all the time, the flick of the button. You have 720,000 employees of US security services who have access to the most intimate information about us. Now, you can say that's the way it is to protect from terrorism. I don't believe it. This is a major issue. We have trust destruction at a very serious level. I mean, if you break into the Swift code system to insert encryption on the back door, that can hardly be considered an asset to humanity. So that is a major issue. Then you have flawed policy initiatives like SOPA, ACTA, PIPA, TPP, and you name it. All of them are flawed, essentially, to a large degree. You have basic rights and principles questioned, like the freedom of press. And all US companies are implicated in this issue. Not because they want to. This is not against Google or Yahoo or any of those guys. Right? It's because they have to. That's the law. So can the future be controlled? My answer for that would be we have to find a way to put the future of the internet up for discussion on a global level, not define it by one country. Because when this happens, the trust is broken. I mean, if you haven't noticed, in the last 3 months, the trust has been systematically broken into that the internet will actually do what it's supposed to do, which is to work to to make it happen, to make us work more efficiently, but also protect us to some degree. I mean, every single company I talk to these days is saying, you know what, we're not so sure we want to go online with this. Maybe we'll just put a server here and keep it in our house. I mean, this can't possibly be a good thing. This is a detriment, it's dysfunctional. We have to fix this. You can safely say that the internet has been tilted. You know, if you're a pinball player, you know what tilting is. When you play pinball and you kick it, right, and it starts ringing and it's off, right, because you've juggled it too much, right? You've rigged it up too much, it's tilted. This needs to be fixed very quickly. This is clearly a major issue for commerce and for growth. So when we look at all these issues about what's happening here, with various debates, spying on the German, on Merkel, and spying on Petrobras, and spying on everybody, basically. Right? I call this the data wars. It's about data. Just like we had war on oil, about oil, and for oil, now we have war on data. In fact, the European Commission is considering not renewing the trade agreements or stopping the discussion about them until this is solved. I don't know what will come out of it, but your bet is as good as mine. So now we're here on this journey. The question is, will we have an internet that's called, I call this a spinternet, or a spy internet, right? Or will we have the splinternet, right? Which is what Europe and Brazil is suggesting, we'll have our own internet. So the German telecom people are saying we should have our data only inside of Germany, so it cannot actually go to America and come back like it does now. Is that realistic? That's not realistic. I mean, this would be a nightmare for technologists and not practical, really. Neither one of those should be our future. We shouldn't live in a world because we use technology that we're being spied on, or that we have to subscribe to a local entity that makes us secure. This is ridiculous. Right? So we have to think about what's going to happen here. Right? So when you look at this general problem, what we have here is a kind of a data greed. Everybody wants our data. The retailer wants you to use the shopping cart so that they know what you've purchased. Your insurance wants to know what you've purchased to make your rate more expensive. Your car company wants to know what car you're driving and how much you've driven. Your bank wants to, everybody wants to know everything. Data greed. And this is not necessarily a bad thing, it's a driver of business, right? But we have to find a balance here, right? If you're looking at what happened with oil, this is the BP platform that burned down. The question is, will big data companies become like big oil? We don't want that. How did these guys become big oil? Because few people were watching. There's only 4 of them. We need to do something about this. I think this is a crucial question about the future. Who will be the ExxonMobil of data? There's a couple obvious answers. I'm not going to mention that because one of them is my client. But how do you do this? I mean, how do you actually create an economy of data that does not become like oil? There's a lot at stake. Cloud computing, healthcare in the cloud, media in the cloud. I mean, everything that we do is going into the cloud. It's irrevocable. Everything. My driving records, my health records, my education, all moving into the cloud. That's a lot at stake there. We have to find a solution on this. And the lack of personal privacy, it's also what is stopping digital money. I mean, the only reason I carry cash is because I don't want people to know that I had 2 drinks last night. Anybody could look this up if I paid with my mobile. That can't be a good thing. So we have to figure this out. I think ultimately the question of big data is this question. McKinsey put out a report the other day talking about what is happening with big data and the potential of savings. And they're talking about roughly a $15 trillion possibility of new commerce and activities with big data, which is very powerful. And all of you in this room, of course, are looking at this headline every day, big data, all big money. It's great. But first of all, the internet runs on data. Right? We know this already, clearly, and it will be even more so in the future. This is unstoppable. It's exponential. Data is becoming the new oil, and data wars are already here. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Oil equals power, as we know. And this has been, of course, the primary guidance behind US policy for the last 3,000 years. Oil equals power. Think about what that means for data. When you have data, you have power. This is what it comes down to. Pollution, like we have with climate change and global warming, pollution with the data equivalent is the result of that abuse and the surveillance and the trust failure. That's the pollution of data. That's just as much of an urgent problem than climate change or global warming. Same category. We have to solve that. And it's interesting to observe that technology first favors the nimble and the small and the decentralized, but then the large ones are taken over, and massively so. Like today, we have very large internet giants, Yahoo, Facebook, QQ, Tencent, and so on, who are basically running most of that infrastructure. And then we have this inequality, right, that is a result of this. And Bruce Schneier in The Atlantic magazine, he talked about what he calls the rise of feudal computing, essentially with us being minions in the feudal lands of Google and others. That's something we have to keep an eye on, as I was saying earlier, unintended consequences. Now ask yourself this simple question. Okay? Do you want to live in a world where you want to be observed just because you're online? Right? That's like the Matrix, red pill, blue pill, right? That's not a good scenario. Can we have privacy and be connected? Obviously, we want to. I mean, being able to use all these cool technologies that enable us to do more commerce and live better lives, they shouldn't make us naked as a consequence. This is a real challenge, I think, for the future of ICT, is to figure this out. And how do you figure this out? Take a guess. You don't invent some software. It's not about technology. This is about social, cultural, political standards. This is about agreement on what's good and what's not. It's not about inventing some piece of DRM. If we're going to live in a world like this, where everything is observed just because we use it, is that the bargain? It's funny to see, of course, I do a lot of work for marketers and advertisers. You could argue that this very same thing that's being used for surveillance is also being used for marketing. It's the same information. And this is where you have this confluence of business, technology, and government, because it fits. We both use it for different purposes. That is sort of like killing the golden goose. So the bottom line of all this is basically this, right? The power of technology is exploding. In fact, it's so explosive, as Google guy said, 1% of 100. I mean, that's a very scary thought to think about what the world is going to look like in 10 years. And especially in developing countries. The changes will be huge. And now we're looking at things like this huge curve of technology, exponentially so, and my personal liberty and privacy shrinking as a result. And that's a trend that we're observing globally. Eventually, this means a lot of people will make the choice not to participate. We're only seeing the very beginning of this. Is this a Faustian bargain? You know what a Faustian bargain is, right? By the story of saying, I make a pact with the devil to get a benefit, like Robert Johnson did as a guitar player, to play better, sold his soul to the devil so he could play better. That's a question a lot of people are asking today. And it may very well be the curse of Facebook. That people are saying, I made a Faustian bargain, I stopped using it. That's why I didn't buy stock on Facebook. And Andreas Weigand, who used to be the CTO of Amazon, he said something very interesting the other day. He's a colleague of mine. He says, people have become instrumented to collect and transmit personal data. We have become the instruments of that process. We've become the people that go into the ground to take the oil out. So the other day, I'm sure you noticed this if you're a YouTube user, YouTube has changed the rules so you can't make a comment unless you're logged in with Google+, which is Google's social platform. This is a brand new rule. So basically what's happening here across this whole arena of Google products and many other ones is clearly this idea of saying that they don't want us to be anonymous. I mean, I understand why. Because if you can track me everywhere, then I become worth gold to you. That's obvious. And I don't necessarily mind it if the benefit is big enough. But ask yourself a simple question. Should we really try to end anonymity on the web? My view is we should not. But I don't know how you think. We can discuss later. The question really is one of balance. It's not a question of yes or no. I mean, balance, of course, is what it usually comes down to, right? But we need to have a culturally differentiated but globally standardized balance of security and privacy. And you guys in this business would have to drive this standard, because without a standard, people will lose trust that they should be doing this, that they should put their money into a digital bank, that they should buy stuff online. The primary reason people don't buy stuff online is because of trust and lack of security. So this is something we have to actually do now. In the next couple of years, we'll have another 3 billion people coming online. Here's a couple scenes about trust. On the top left, in Australia, the Australian police is scanning everybody's license plate as they go by. It's standard procedure, using a scanning device. So your car, if you drive in New South Wales, which is Sydney area, right, 360 shots a year of your license plate are captured and kept for 5 years. Now, if that's not abuse of technology, I don't know what is. Right? I mean, I can understand that you would want this as a policeman. You can find out if this guy is a terrorist, in parentheses, or just a drunk driver. You can find out by scanning his license plate, yes. But should you keep that for 5 years, right, to create a history of my driving? Dashboard cameras, garbage cans that find out who's going by because of their Bluetooth connection? This is in London. Right? It was just recently outlawed. It reads your MAC address on your mobile phone and knows that you've gone by already 14 times before. I mean, why? Right? Just because we can. They get along great with the NSA. Right? Face recognition software. It's okay for the police to use this, but for me on a date, like I do in Japan, I'm not sure. So the question is, yes, we can, not scan. Yes, we can generate, access, refine, distribute, and use and we should. There's a huge business there, and we have to. But the flip side of that is it will need to be subject to new social contracts, to ethics and rules and to laws. And just like the law has not caught up with downloading of music on the internet, it's 20 years later, still hasn't caught up. Right? Nobody downloads anymore. Everybody's streaming. The definition of copyright is out there somewhere in cyberspace, but in reality, it's this. Right? We need we had to have a new social contract and come up with those rules. Otherwise, people don't feel safe. This is very, very important for our future. This is from 2011 New York Times, an article that was saying that all of us as consumers are bleeding data. We've become the object of desire for lots of those companies. I think what we need to do is we don't need companies like Google and others to say that they are not evil or don't be evil. We have to hear from them that they won't be evil. This is very important. We need to create an ecosystem where we're all saying, you know what, we can do this. We can exploit you, but we won't. Otherwise, we don't have trust. I mean, how would you generate trust otherwise? Right? So I think it's time for what I call a global digital bill of rights that says what people can do with data and what's happening with telecommunications, who's in charge of it, and how can we believe that we won't be exploited. This is your job to do this. Your job isn't just to run the network and make it run faster. You know, that's not a permanent business proposal. It's about what people do on there. So while you were observing people, it's about two things. The do is to observe, to listen, to connect, to respect, to engage, and to prosper as a consequence. And many companies are doing this. But the don't is to abuse and to resell and to surveil and hypermarket and do all these things that you can also do with the same information. Because the reality is this is taken from a movie by Tiffany Shlain called Connected. You should watch it if you have a chance. The reality is this: we're moving into a world that's completely interdependent. Our businesses don't run with a single tree. That would be Apple. Right? They can make their own tree. Right? It's not possible. We're all completely interconnected. We're interdependent in our business model. You know, we're depending on advertising. We're depending on subscription. We're depending on taxes. It's all interconnected. The default is really this, ultimately about interdependence. And there's been a term that's been floating around the internet. It's called digital sovereignty. being independent digitally from others. This is an important thought. Can we be digitally sovereign, independent, if 95% of that stuff is run from American servers? I mean, it's a huge question to debate. Or what will they do to make us sovereign? I mean, would Google sue the US government over those rules if it wasn't for Edward Snowden? Come on. Clearly, they played along as they could, just like everyone else, right, to create business. But in the end, it's all interdependent. We have to create a model that is connected together. And then the other thing is that we should not try to use technology to solve cultural problems. If you go back to 10 years before today, the music business and, of course, the movie business tried to use copy protection to force people to pay. Right? Didn't work because the social contract wasn't there. It wasn't done well enough. I mean, they spent billions of dollars on this idea of copy protection. And where are we now with this? I mean, DVD region coding. What is that? Anybody remember this? Billions spent on this. So we need to figure out how we use technology to the right purpose, but not to replace agreements on social contracts. So let me summarize. First, this is the most important slide here. Okay? If you're in the tech business, you're in the trust business. And if you don't emphasize that trust and ethics and standards are important, you won't have a tech business. This is very, very important, especially when it's about communications and connectivity. Second point now, we're moving from an industrial society to an information society and what I call an experience society. So basically this mindset becomes from industrial and mechanical to digital and exponential. This is also about our leadership. I mean, how we're going to go from a background of infrastructure and pure engineering to this idea of digital and exponential. This is not about physical stuff. So this is a real stretch, I think, for many of us coming from a background of industrial and mechanical. The linear business model, we grow like this, and we have return on investment, we have the CFO making plans and all these things. Not going to work. This is about lateral business models, moving up and going like this, right? Or about being exponential. Long-term competitive advantages. Tell me one company that today has a long-term competitive advantage, except for the CIA. I mean, tell me one. It's about arenas and transit advantage. I mean, the companies that do this are doing great. I mean, Google stock is at over $1,000. That's what they do. They build ecosystems. You can say what you want about Google, but this is what they do. This is what they know how to do. So a quick summary, and then we'll take some questions and hopefully have a debate. Point number one, we're entering an age of unprecedented opportunities, in my view. We're going from linear thinking to lateral thinking. And there's so much potential in this. It's about looking at not the industry, but the arena, a much wider view of things. If you're in the telecom business, you're in the media business, you're in the trust business, you're in the education business, you're the content business, right? You're in the device business. Okay, we have amazing technology, and it's getting more amazing by the minute. In fact, technology is now so amazing that many of us are addicted to it. I mean, basically, what was the number I read the other day? 47% of American kids, when they wake up at night, update their Facebook status. I mean, it's mind-boggling how addicted we are to technology. So amazing technology must be balanced with ethics and standards. Otherwise, we have unintended consequences. Imagine a nuclear power plant and its unintended consequences. Same thing. There needs to be a mechanism for this. Privacy and trust failure is the biggest hurdle. I mean, if you look at machine-to-machine, the Internet of Things, big data, cloud computing, artificial intelligence, will we do this? If we don't have some form of privacy left, we won't. Some of us will, depending, of course, where you live. If you live in England, you apparently don't care. That's what I read the other day. I doubt it, though that's actually true. Interdependence is inevitable. We are now entering a future where it's about connected business models, not about egosystems, but about ecosystems. But at the same time, it is also important to be sovereign, to be in charge of my own destiny. This is going to be very important for Europe, I think. for our future. I think the internet needs to be governed by an international body representing all interest sectors in the agenda. That sounds like Mission Impossible, obviously. But I think that's where we're going. Whatever that means, I'll leave that for you to discuss. But without that, I think we're heading in one direction and no other. The final point, big data should not be another big oil. You know where big oil has brought us, right? To the fact that in 10 years, we'll probably have more tsunamis a week than we have in the last 10 years in every year. You may not believe this, but ultimately what's happening with data is the value of data is worth more than the value of fossil fuels. And that will all happen in the next 5 years. Finally, I want to leave you with a quote. I don't know whose quote it is. I found it on the internet like I find everything. But if Henry Ford had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. You can ask your customers what they want and you'll get an answer. And that's also a good thing to do, of course. But really, leadership is about going beyond the obvious. And you here, of course, most of you are leaders in your turf. We have to go beyond the obvious. If Jeff Bezos would have asked people if they want a Kindle e-reader, people would have said, what are you talking about? What is that? We don't know what it is. He invented it. He made a market. So go one step beyond the obvious. So I want to thank you for your attention. And you'll be able to download this presentation shortly from our website, futuristgerd.com. And of course, I'd be very happy to take your questions. I promised I would take a look, so I will actually do this right now. But we can take real-life questions from real-life people as well, if you don't feel authorized to tweet. Thank you very much. Okay.
Gerd, thank you very much again. It's a wonderful presentation as always. You always impress me anytime that I see you, I hear about you, and again, anywhere that I go.
Thank you.
My name is Reza Jafari. Some people know me, I guess, here because of the past couple of days in the program. One thing that really comes, again, I'm sure you have an answer for it, but I did not see it during this presentation. I was a few minutes late with other matters. How are you going to reinforce this Bill of Rights? How are you going to reinforce the social contract that comes in? Because, again, it's Supreme Court, whether it's the UK or US or any place else, as an ultimate authority of being able to reinforce all the rules that we're discussing. How are we going to do it in this environment?
Well, I think in many ways it's similar to nuclear proliferation agreements. You have people violating them, you have people doing things on the outside, but by and large, there are other reasons why you would comply. The Swiss government is not happy with making their banking open and not secret, but they'll have to do it. They could refuse, yes, but there would be side effects. So part of this mechanism is agreeing on simple standards, on very simple standards on how you could do this. Right? For example, if the police scans my license plate, I'm fine with that to protect them from things that may happen that they don't know about. But keep it for 5 years, I think that's abusive. Right? So those kind of standards would not be so hard to manifest. For example, do you need a warrant to look at people's email? I think you should have a warrant, unless you have a strong reason to suspect crime, right? But not a flat rate, just out there. Yes, it would be difficult. But what is the alternative? What is in it? Once we have 5 billion people connected to the internet, which is in less than 3 years, right? We'll have 8 billion people on the planet in the next 7 years. Out of those will be 5 to 6 billion connected people. If we don't have a standard, we'll be in deep hell, right? Basically. And so, yes, people will continue to use this and do this because it's there, right? And it's addictive. Right? But it won't create benefits. For example, inequality, right? Inequality is a side effect of this problem. Right? Because the people who are able to do this participate, the other ones don't.
Gert,
yes.
Bob Horton. I'm actually a board member of the regulator in Papua New Guinea. But first of all, as an Australian citizen, I noted in that policeman surveying cars, he had an Arizona badge on his arm.
Oh, okay.
So he's
Sorry.
actually, Arizona's actually in the USA and not in Australia. So yeah, we've got some problems.
Good
but,
observation.
yeah.
But it is true, nevertheless.
Yeah, no, but let me congratulate you on an excellent presentation, really a thought starter. And towards the end, you mentioned that the governance of the internet should be by an international body. Now, do you see that the ITU might have some role in that, or is the ITU in some arena that it doesn't realize it's in at the moment?
Well, you already answered your question. Well, yes, clearly, of course, the ITU is a player in this turf, right? But as far as I can see, making a claim on being that entity is another thing. Right? And this is not against Americans at all. Right? But clearly, this is too important to leave it up to the people who are cooking up innovations on one side of the country. Right? And this is what we have now. So clearly, that debate is already going on between the European and American, dissonances now as to what should be happening there. But I think this is not about the struggle for control, but it's much like the United Nations in the end has a control component, but it's about enablement. And so how do we do this? I think it's a difficult mission, clearly. But then again, what is the alternative? I mean, I work with lots of telco companies and others around the world on these issues, and the bottom line is this: people don't change until they feel pain. So our alternative is to experience that people will not participate, will not buy stuff, will not trust us, will not switch to digital money, will not use this resource, will not learn online, which gives us pain. Right? Or we can then prevent this and make it happen. That's kind of our alternative. I mean, compare the music business, which is down by 71%. Basically, music has turned into freebie, right, to the movie business. The movie business is exploding despite the fact that people don't buy DVDs. Because they realize there's something coming up that they have to respond to. So, yes, I think the ITU has a good place there, but needs to live up to the expectation, clearly. Other questions, comments?
Thank you. Alan Horn with the Global eHealth Foundation, chaired by Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And one of the areas that we have identified is this Global eHealth Charter or Global eHealth document, which is critical to unlocking eHealth. So we think that's very important, so we support you in your points there. I've experienced one thing recently, and maybe others have. Now, on logging onto certain databases, we're now having to pay not to receive advertising. What do you just feel about this particular trend?
Well, this is a very good question. I think paying for privacy is a future scenario that we're going to see. I mean, paying for privacy is not necessarily wrong. But if it leads to the fact that only some of us can be private because we can pay, then it would be wrong. Right? So I think the ultimate question is a lot of data, for example, open data initiatives with governments are crucial to people inventing things. And this is already changing the world. Open data needs to be available for free. Right? But there's always, of course, a concept of saying ultimately you offer premium values for premium payment, which isn't necessarily wrong. I think there's an interesting business model there. However, I think that we shouldn't have to pay what is already ours. I mean, privacy is a civil right, simply, right? And I shouldn't have to pay to maintain it. And it shouldn't have to pay just because it's the business plan of other companies to take it away, while I haven't observed. So, I mean, I use all these platforms, okay? You can find me everywhere, and I contribute my data. But I want them to live up to the expectation of protecting me in return, because for example, Google is a very clear model. The other day, I decided to move my email away from Google because of this issue. And just to try it out, I'm going to have to pay roughly $3,000 a year to have email away from Google. So Google has been giving me a service for 7 years that's worth $21,000. But in return, the data I've given to Google, they know more about me than my wife. That's true. I mean, your wife doesn't know what you've Googled. Right? So putting all that stuff together, location data, email data, browsing data, YouTube data, Google Plus data, if that's not worth $21,000, you know what the average value of an internet user is on the web today already? $485 a year. So clearly the equation is somewhat off there. I think we're going to see that come around. I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to some way of paying for better privacy, like having a more safe bank account and stuff. But in general, it should be part of the system. Another question or comment? Right here?
Yes, hello. Clement
Sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Clement Schatz from All the Content, also from Switzerland. I had a question about the enslavement versus empowerment. How do you see the future of democracies in the world? Will it be spreading out or not?
Well, that's a vast question. I can answer that with one sentence. Should all be like Switzerland. No, just kidding. I think what we see happening now is that because of this vast user empowerment, it clearly has a side effect of making people more accountable and making things more transparent, right? Which is a very, very powerful thing in general. So the government is becoming more transparent to me, and companies are becoming more transparent. But while I do this, I'm becoming more transparent as well, because I'm also part of the same machine, right? So I think we need to differentiate between personal privacy as a person and public transparency. Right? It's not the same thing. A company needs to be transparent with all of their dealings, and the government and the police and all these things. But as a person, you know, I have a right to withhold some of it, as the European Commission says, a right to be left alone. Right? That's different than a company, because I have a different way of looking at things. Right? So ultimately, I think democracy is better off for all of these things. Right? And we're seeing this at work. For example, if you compare what happened in Turkey to Brazil, Turkish Prime Minister said, social media is the worst menace to society. He probably won't keep on saying that in the near future. But in Brazil, Dilma Rousseff said, you know what, you don't like what's happening? Let's have a debate on Twitter. And let's talk about how we can fix this. And within 2 weeks, the bus prices went down again, and the whole debate is going on social media, and she's part of it. And nothing has changed. The buses are still just as bad. Right? But she took in the conversation. That's a different response. Right? And that's the same thing going to happen in Turkey. So ask yourself a simple question. Will governments in the future have the option of hiding behind a wall? Very unlikely. In fact, I think this is it's a big part of this, but at the same time, of course, the same technology can be used to look at me. So, something worth thinking about. Another question?
Yes, thank you. My name is Margit Brandl with Nokia Solutions and Networks. And I was intrigued by your idea of having a new social contract and a global bill of rights. But given the speed of change that you just mentioned, what would be the right forum to negotiate that, and what would be at this timescale you foresee?
Yes, well, I think this is one of the moments where we have to think about what really matters to us in this business. You know, ultimately, the discussion about running better networks or being faster, having lower prices, and all these things are things that matter a lot because of our bottom line, right? But if the business model is flawed, you know, when I connect and do these things, I have a benefit, but I have this huge disadvantage, then the business gets broken. Right? When the trust breaks, the business breaks. So the job, I think, of us that are in the business doing this is to also generate a trust platform so that we can have benefit from it. And I think this is should be part of our job, right? Not an extra add-on thing. As I was saying earlier, we're coming from a background of structural thinking, you know, engineering, industrial, infrastructure. That's not our future. I mean, that's going to be there and going to be very important. But this is about exponential changes, societal changes that will drive the business model. I mean, clearly this is one of the big challenges, you know, how we can actually do both and how we have a mind for both, you know, clearly. But the obsession with making things work has led to the fact that they work very well, but do the wrong thing. As there was a quote, I think it was from Einstein, who said, if you measure the wrong thing, you do the wrong thing. Whoever said that, but I think it may be a fit here. Another question?
Thank you. My name is Adriana Nuchter. I'm an independent advisor, particularly in the privacy area. And, you know, I like the idea of a global chart, but having been in international negotiations and organizations for a long time, this can take an awful long time, and it can also, principles can be watered down because you need to negotiate and reach agreement with everybody. So while I think it's required, I think at the same time, at the national level, a lot can be done by governments or by consumer organizations, for example, to start building that social contract. And to, for example, talk about principles about no tracking and tracing for, say, normal day-to-day business actions like buying things online and banking and these type of things, or, you know, tracing only within the limits of the company and their purposes. So I think a lot can be done at the national level. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I think there's three levels. First, cities. You know, cities are now at the cutting edge of innovation. So a lot of cities are actually solving these problems and saying, you know, we use public data, but we don't do this and we do that, and they have guidelines. You know, Rio de Janeiro, San Francisco, Copenhagen, you know, they're having initiatives. This is going to be much about cities, I think. And then on the national level, of course, that's going to be one of the key drivers. But the problem is, of course, if we're not coordinating internationally, we have this huge discrepancy what's possible over here and what's going to be done over there. And if technology is concentrated in one place and everything is going through there, you know.
I agree, but at this very moment, things need to be done already. You know, one needs to be practical.
Yeah, let's put it this way. This is a lot like climate change, okay? I don't care if you believe in climate change or not. If you're a denialist or not, I don't care, okay? But the bottom line is, it's very hard for us to imagine that we are borrowing from the future because we live here today. And we want to go to Malaga for the weekend and fly there, right? And I do that, you do that. Huh? It's very hard to imagine how it would be like, you know, if that changes. Right? But this issue that we're facing here is here today, right? Much more than climate change even. And so we have to use some imagination and say, what happens if we don't fix this? As you know, cyber terrorism and cyber warfare is an extension of the same problem. So it's something we have to look at. And so the consensus of that would be for all organizations and companies in that turf to start an initiative on this, rather than saying we're going to, you know, invest more money in faster networks, which is also a good thing to have, right? But there is a flip side to this.
And then the second question is about what type of solutions you think people will go to once that trust is broken. Will it be things like Tor or and so on and so forth?
Yes, good question. In terms of timing, of course, that's locally quite different, you know, culturally also. For example, we in Europe, Central Europe, tend to think of trust and security as a larger issue. So we don't participate, for example, which is the primary choice of consumers will be not to participate. So think about that for a second, for example, with e-health. You know, we could save an estimated 22 million lives if we had e-health mechanisms of monitoring and exchanging information. But will you do that if you know that this information is not ultimately secure? You wouldn't, right? So there's a societal disbenefit out of this. I think we only have about 3 years for that to really have to be solved because of the huge exponential growth of technology and user base. I mean, the countries are connecting at lightning speed. And there's very large issues as being part of this. So I don't want to be dystopian in the sense of saying that we're facing, you know, a data war or something. Right? I just think that we're going to miss opportunities as a result. This is the primary driver of economy, of course, is to create growth of some sort. Right? So I think in many countries, this is still an issue that's under the surface. Most consumers don't know and don't care. Right? That's going to change very quickly. The day you get a letter from your insurance company saying, we've observed that you buy a lot of alcohol and you seem to be a smoker from your Tesco supermarket card that we have gotten data from. Right? In return, we're going to discuss what your rates will be next year unless you change your behavior. I mean, this is all like within reach. Okay? If you use this app called Google Now, you may know what Google Now, or Google Field Trip. Google Now essentially takes all of your data from Google, and it says, it warns you in advance of what's going to happen in the afternoon. It says, you know, you have to go to this meeting, but there is a traffic jam. Do you want to call this person to inform them that you're late? Right? They're actually anticipating your next move. Right? It's very powerful stuff, very, you know, very good stuff for the user. Right? But it can also anticipate what you're going to buy next. So it will say, you know, we'll give you something that you know that only the most intimate knowledge of your information could provide. Right? That's very powerful stuff, but also has a flip side. Right? So when users are finally realizing what's going on and that the Faustian bargain has way overextended, this will be a tidal backlash. So we'll see a lot of change coming from this, you know, and people not signing up or dropping out or not participating or and so on, and generating inequality, right? Because the rich people can pay to be safe, right? Like us. Any other questions?
Thank you very much for your perspectives. I found them fascinating, to say the least.
Thank you.
But the logistics of centuries back gave us like a parliamentary democracy. What is the future of political representatives when apps and machines can represent those individuals on a real-time basis, in your view? I've got 2 more questions.
2 more questions. Okay. So basically, I didn't get to talk about this, but my view is that, we didn't touch on this, but there's a lot of research showing that basically between 30 and 40% of most jobs that we have today will go away because of automation. Okay. And so if you're a cab driver, the Google car will drive itself. If you're data analysis, the software will fetch the data. If you're a checkout clerk, we'll have the mobile phone. And on and on. So roughly 1 billion jobs. Whether that's correct or not, that's just the ballpark. Yeah? A third of all jobs. So what that means for us, and this is the answer to your question, is I think our role becomes more right brain, more about creative stuff, about making connections, about discovering things, about doing the soft stuff that machines can't do. And a lot of these things will be about shifting the way that we take what we can do best and put that emphasis on that. And of course, there'll be lots of people manning the machines and inventing stuff about them. I have more of a positive view. I think in the end, the unemployment question that's connected to this will lead to a simple realization that we probably will pay people without working. I mean, in the end, that comes down to a very simple thing. Can we pay people to be creative in other ways without necessarily having a job? And that seems to be the sort of understanding 10 years from now. And in fact, in Switzerland, we have a ballot already on this next year, which is the idea of paying people 2,500 Swiss francs a month without working, a guaranteed monthly income. So this is a whole different debate, but what was your question again? I forgot.
I think you've answered it.
Okay.
The second 2 are related questions, and they have to do with time frame. You mentioned working in a 5-year time frame, which I thought was very ambitious. But given the exponential change that you see, I can understand why. What time frame do you give to my continent, which has lines on it dating back from the Berlin conference, when the future seems borderless? What time frame do you give to the concept of economic value of things that are not data, when we are seeing that the way the economies are being shaped around information will certainly have an impact, say, on 3D printing of shoes that you alluded to? So what time frames do you give to that? Thank you.
Well, I think Africa, by and large, is, of course, a continent of taking leaps. What we do there is basically we're seeing what people are doing, not being connected at all, not even television or radio, going to mobile devices and taking leaps, and devices becoming in the neighborhood of $10, like they already are in India, $30 for a tablet. So that is going to drive a lot of leap concepts in Africa. For example, mobile money, M-Pesa, has been the biggest thing in Africa. It's gigantic, bigger than any bank would ever thought of. Right? And those kind of leaps we're going to see in Africa in every possible way. So if education is going to go online, it won't go online in Germany. Why do we need that? We have the money to pay for books. Right? It'll happen in India, in Brazil, and in Africa. Right? And I'm particularly hopeful about Africa because I have the understanding that basically there we have this opportunity to move in a much larger way because of the size of population, but also because of the current status of disconnectivity. I mean, Africa is, if you're looking at the global stats, the biggest growth of connectivity is happening in Africa. And of course, the biggest desire to have more information and more connectivity in this way as well. So I think it's a huge opportunity there. It's not, I mean, I've been to Africa many places. It's not going to be easy, given the speed of things. And I think we're all under this pressure of saying, okay, basically technology keeps on inventing more and more and more and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. So you'll see things like the Kindle will become free, the Amazon Kindle, because it costs $5 to make. So Amazon will say, you buy a few books, you get it for free. And we're going to see all these things happen in a very dramatic way. So for us to sit here and observe is not really an option, because on an exponential curve, it puts us downward. Right? And this is really quite a challenge, to get your head around this. I think we have time for one more question, then we have to kick you out of here. One more question or comment, or okay? I know you had a third question, but I got to take his now.
I'm Frans Panken from Surfnet in the Netherlands. I wonder if we allow Google to anticipate what we want to do and what we want to have. Where is the ethic border? So why not our ISP and our telecom provider? They cannot use the data, but Google can, and Apple can, and all the over-the-top application providers can. But as soon as the telecom operator does it, we jump up and down and say, hey, this is not allowed. You're not allowed to use my data.
Yeah, good point. I mean, those that did not ask for permission are advantaged. Right? I mean, YouTube, I know the founder of YouTube, we had this debate when he founded it, right? He said, we have the DMCA, we can try this, you know, the worst thing that could happen is I could go to jail for a year or something, right? But he didn't ask the TV stations and others for permission, he just put the stuff up. Now YouTube has 1.2 billion users, is the biggest broadcaster in the world, and stands to make 2 or 3 billion a month from advertising in the next few years. Right? They didn't ask for permission. Okay? The question is, you as an incumbent organization, right? How do you do that? You can't. Right? You can't just not ask for permission. Right? But I think you can work with those people who are pushing the envelope. Right? And this is something that's not happening enough at all. There's so many startups inventing a lot of really powerful stuff. Why are we not actually communicating with them and bringing them insight? Right? As a telco ISP organization, there are people inventing stuff every single day, and we're not even aware of it. So if we can't push the envelope, we can import it. You know, this is something I think, in the end, it's going to come down to a dualistic approach, which is to run your current business as good as you can and build a new one that's going to eat the old one. Because someone is going to eat you anyway. Right? Might as well be yourself. Right? So maybe I'll end with this quote. You know, I think it's the whole thing is going to be about two things. You can either disrupt or be disrupted. And those are our choices. And I think if we're looking at what's happening, there's a sort of a little piece of digital Darwinism here. Right? And that speed is accelerating, right? Users are accelerating, issues are accelerating, and we're still going on a linear curve. Right? So I'll leave you that thought. Thanks very much for listening.